Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This morning we're going to hear from Mr. Davies.
Would you like to repeat after me? I do solemnly,
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Can you state your full name, please?
My name is Mark Richard Hansel Davies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davies. In front of you, you should have a witness statement in a bundle. Can I ask you to turn to the first page? Is it dated the 10th of April 2024?
It is.
And if I could ask you to turn to the signature page, that's page 52. Is that your signature?
It is.
And is that statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
It is. I have two amendments, if I'm able to
Absolutely.
draw the inquiry's attention to them. In paragraph 56, I refer to a document. This document is an email chain between myself and senior board members. That should read colleagues, not senior board members. And it's in response, then says, which discusses media coverage around Horizon issues and SS's Part 2 report. That should be SS's interim report.
Thank you.
And then in paragraph 117, there's a sentence which reads, all criminal cases have been reviewed by external legal teams. And I recall having seen Brian Altman, KC's evidence that, of course, his the review which led from his review was going back to 2010.
Thank you very much. That witness statement has the URN WITN 09860100 and will be published on the inquiry's website shortly. Sticking with your witness statement, please, could we have that up on screen and turn to page 5? I'm just going to go through a few passages. Page 5, paragraph 14. Thank you. The bottom half of that paragraph says as follows. It says, while much has been written and said about my post office colleagues, I wish to pay tribute to those with whom I worked in communications who were professional at all times. I have no doubt we could have done more, but I am proud of the steps taken to seek to change to a more open culture, a mission which was led by Paula Venables as CEO and supported by the executive. Over the page, please, to paragraph 17. The decision to open up the business to external scrutiny and subsequently to seek to mediate cases were the actions of a business which took its responsibilities to its people very seriously. These initiatives and others were led, in my opinion, integrity and care by Ms. Venables and with the support of the board. Paragraph 27, page 9. In my view, the board and executive were diligent and effective in dealing with the issues relating to Horizon. Paragraph 35, please, at page 13. The final sentence there on that page, if we could scroll down, please, it says as follows. Any concern that the system did not work properly was taken extremely seriously for the very reason that it was so fundamental to so many people. Paragraph 57, please, at page 21. The culture being developed in the business by Miss Venables and Alice Perkins was around 3 values: care, commitment, and challenge. And there was serious intent behind those words. If we scroll down, please, to paragraph 60. At the bottom of that paragraph, you say, Angela van der Bogard was key to this work and an energetic advocate of delivering commitments to continuous improvement, such as through the branch user forum, improvement programme, and the Post Office Advisory Council. Paragraph 88, please, on page 32. You say there, as noted above, the Post Office had at the time a press office team which would lead on all press inquiries reporting to me. They were a high-performing and high-quality team. If we could move towards the end, please, page 51. Paragraph 145. You address in turn each of the senior members of the team. At 145, you say about Miss Venables, the leader I knew was one who had deep integrity and who was guided by deeply held personal values. She seemed to me to place these values at the forefront of her consideration of these issues. She was sincere in the efforts she led to try to reach conclusions. It was her and Alice Perkins as chair who insisted on the business investigating in detail. 147, about Alice Perkins, you say Alice Perkins as chair of Post Office also, it seemed to me, wished only to find a way to resolve these issues appropriately and sought to do so tenaciously and with great care and an eye for detail. Paragraph 148, please. You say, I would also like to mention Angela van der Bogard. I found her to be incredibly committed to public service and to the Post Office. She was detailed, thorough, and empathetic. She was also, it seemed to me, committed to getting to the truth, hampered by a lack of information we now have to hand. Is it fair to summarise your evidence in those paragraphs that I've read out as painting a picture of a communications team and a senior leadership team that was committed to opening up to challenge?
Yes, that's fair.
Yes. Can we please turn to poll 001 380 985? Poll 00380985. Thank you. It's an email that the inquiry has seen before. It's dated the 2nd of July 2013.
It hasn't reached my screen yet, Mr. Blake. It's it's about to, I think.
Thank you. And this is the email from Paula Venables to yourself and others in answer to the question, what is a non-emotive word for computer bugs, glitches, defects that happen as a matter of course? And her answer is, from her husband, exception or anomaly. You can also say conditional exception anomaly, which only manifests itself under unforeseen circumstances. Does that help? And your response was, I like exception very much. Was renaming bugs part of a culture that was open to challenge at the Post Office?
No, I mean, the background to this email was that we were concerned, in fact, that bugs sounded like too sort of slangy a word, and we wanted to be really serious about how we approached these issues. And the reality of Paula Venables talking to her husband, who I believe works in that industry, was that she had thought it would be worth asking him what his view might be, did so, and I thought that exception had a due seriousness about it.
Mr. Davies, what is a non-emotive word for computer bugs? It doesn't say what is a non-slangy word, does it?
No, it doesn't.
The suggestion there is you are looking for a word that doesn't evoke emotions.
I think I read the email as around how could we find a more appropriate way to describe them in bugs or glitches or defects in a way that was in line with a sort of IT industry way of speaking.
Can we please look at poll 002973030? Same day, 2nd of July, 2013. The bottom of page 1, please. An email from yourself to Martin Edwards, re PV and AP brief. Who was AP?
Sorry, could you just repeat the question?
Who was AP?
Oh, sorry, apologies. Alice Perkins.
So there's a brief for Paula Venables and Alice Perkins. It says the speaking note needs to be firmer. We want to make clear our position and underline our view that no evidence to support the systemic failures. If we go over the page, please, to page 2, the 5th paragraph, you say as follows. We shouldn't call the user group a Horizon user group. Makes it appear we are acknowledging issue with Horizon. Branch management user group, question mark. Was the suggestion of removing the word Horizon from the user group part of a culture that was open to challenge at the post office?
No, I think what's happening in this email is this is after the Second Sight interim report, which found no evidence of systemic issues, but very serious issues around the way in which training and support was not being delivered to postmasters. So I think that's why we thought, given that this was a wider issue than the computer system at that time, and in the context of that time, branch management user group felt to me, and I think it eventually was called the branch user forum, but I may have recalled that incorrectly. But that seemed to be a more accurate description of what we were seeking to do.
Makes it appear we are acknowledging issue with Horizon. Aren't you removing that word to avoid the suggestion that there is an issue with Horizon?
Well, at the time, it was very clear to us that there wasn't an issue with Horizon because the Second Sight report had said that there were no systemic issues, and we wanted to be really clear that what we were talking about was a very deeply held commitment to improving the way in which we supported postmasters and all of those people who used the post office system.
Can we turn to poll 001620068? We're now on the 23rd of September 2013, same year. Could we please turn to the bottom of page 4, please? This is the email that we've seen from Alan Bates to Paula Venables, Susan Crichton, Angela van der Bogard and others. And he is communicating that this afternoon he received the following email. It's a prime example of the thuggery being exerted on defenceless sub-postmasters as the Post Office deny legal representation by arrogant and uncontrolled Post Office personnel. And he forwards the email that says, "Hello, I'm Alan. I'm writing on behalf of my son-in-law, Martin Griffiths, who has recently been in touch with you about the treatment doled out to him by the hierarchy at the Crown Office in Chester." If we scroll down, please. It says, "This morning he drove off to work, got out of his car and walked in front of a bus. He's dangerously ill in hospital at Liverpool. The post office had driven him to suicide. All the family are in hospital. I'm alone waiting for the telephone for further news of him. I would urge you to publicise this, another incident that has been caused by the bully boys at the Crown Office." If we turn to the top of page 4, please, bottom of page 3. There's an email from yourself in response, and you say, "Thanks, Susan. Given the potential media element, please can we line up a specialist media lawyer in case we need urgent advice this evening?" Was instructing a specialist media lawyer when Martin Griffiths had, at that point, was dangerously ill in hospital, part of a culture that was open to challenge at the post office?
This was a really deeply tragic and terrible case. And everybody at the post office, when we read that email, was deeply, deeply shocked. And a number of conversations took place outside of email about it. And obviously the natural human instinct of every single person who heard about that story was to be deeply, deeply shocked. In terms of specialist media lawyer, my role within the post office was to be the communications director, and there was a very strong likelihood of communications media coverage in relation to this tragic case. And I was very conscious of the media guidelines that exist around the reporting of suicide, or as it appeared in this case, attempted suicide, and wanted to make sure that we had somebody on hand who would be able to give us some guidance about those matters.
Was lining up a specialist media lawyer really intended just to deal with the way that Mr. Griffiths is described, the suicide issue? Was it not protecting the post office from negative publicity?
My thinking in lining up a specialist media lawyer was around the point around the guidelines in terms of reporting suicide.
Were you aware of those guidelines?
I was aware of them, but not to a very detailed degree, which is why I wanted to have some more advice on it.
Are they complicated?
They're not complicated, no, but I think it was the right thing to do from in terms of my role. It was the right thing to do to potentially line up specialist advice.
Can we look at poll 00101361, please? We're now into 2014, the 11th of September 2014. Can we turn to page 3, please? There is an email from a sub-postmaster, Brian Hewson, referring to a report on BBC Radio 4. Post Office's Horizon computer system sub-postmasters having lost their positions, and including a handful who were imprisoned. Tuesday evening, scoured the Post Office website for official statement, couldn't find it. I must have missed it. Media pages, the press release must be there. Nothing listed. Started to think I'd imagined the news on the radio. Wednesday, warm-up consisted of hearing staff talking of seeing local TV news regarding Post Office Horizon, innocents jailed, lost businesses. My staff were in a state of shock and disbelief and anger at how people like them and their friends could have been accused of theft, lost their homes, or even worse, sent to prison. I was half prepared to meet my staff's reaction. I got reassurance as best I could. I gave reassurance as best I could. New management at the top, Paula Vennells, new policies of openness, transparency, and honesty, working together across the whole organisation, as per last forum meeting in London. Wednesday night, scoured the Post Office website for another hour. No statement found. My best efforts. Why was this handled this way? To ensure the stated policy of openness, transparency, etc. is fully implemented as designed, i.e. nice-sounding words that will never permeate, even within head office/support centre London. Why was there not a memo view as a minimum means of communicating simultaneous with the press briefings? As Michael knows Angela, in the last few weeks I've been trying to support branches with the mails coaching. Please do not underestimate the blow to counters, staff and branch owners' morale of the news broadcast on Tuesday. I intend to bringing this matter up under any other business at today's meeting, and I'm hoping this note will allow time for an appropriate answer to be given. Page 2, please. It's an email from yourself to Angela van der Boogaard and others. At the bottom of the page, please. And you say, I will email Brian. I appreciate the point, but I'm not prepared to make a decision based on feedback from one source. If we had pushed messaging out, thousands of people who didn't hear coverage would have been alarmed and worried, and I don't believe that doing that would be in anyone's interests. Was not addressing a BBC Radio 4 story about imprisoned sub-postmasters, part of a culture that was open to challenge at the post office?
This was one case of where there had been media coverage around these issues, and it was always a very fine judgment as to whether to effectively do a piece of communications, internal communications, to the whole network, which was around 11,000 branches and 40,000 people, when in fact it was a piece of coverage that was a one-off. I think, I may have got that one wrong, and I do remember ringing Brian Hewson about it and talking him through it. I think they were very difficult lines to get right. What we did make sure was that all of our field teams and everybody in the NBSC, the business centre, the helpline effectively, that was set up to support postmasters, had lines, had positions to take if those issues were raised with us. And I think, as I say in the separate email there, we hadn't had a huge amount of questions about the issue, but I accept it's a fine line, and I accept I might have got that one wrong.
Thousands of people who didn't hear the coverage would now hear it if you had made a statement, wouldn't they?
Well, yes, and the reason, because of course this is 2014, where we're acting in good faith on the basis that we don't believe there are systemic issues with Horizon, where we have 50,000 people using the system every day, and we have a number of clients, and not to mention, of course, the millions of customers who came to the post office. And one of the considerations was not creating something which would lead to people being concerned about their post office business in whatever form that took. Obviously, that's the context in which we were operating at the time, where we didn't believe that there were systemic issues with the system.
Poll 0016258, please. We're now in 2015, 10th of August 2015. The second half of the page, please. An email from yourself. Dear all, this note is designed following a group executive discussion today to set out why we're not proposing to put up an interview for Panorama on Horizon. We'll come back to the substance of this document, but if we scroll up, there's a response from Paula Vennels. She says, I agree completely. I have no wish to give any legitimacy to Panorama, and our statement should make that clear. Where we can give an objective view, e.g. in other media, then fine. Was that part of a culture that was open to challenge at the post office, not putting up somebody for interview on Panorama?
Again, this was a very fine line. We had initially planned to put an interviewee up for the Panorama programme, but ultimately decided not to because the programme was clear that it intended to go into individual cases, and we weren't prepared to do that at the time, largely because those cases were being looked at by the CCRC.
Poll 00174418, 18th of August 2015. This is after the Panorama programme. If we scroll down to the bottom, there is an email to you from Eleanor Nister. Were you aware she was the internal audit manager at the post office? Yes. She says, hi Mark, the programme last evening was indeed damaging, and I think highlights again the questions about the Horizon systems. And if it is true there were bugs within the system, ? I know our external auditor raised a couple of years some issues regarding the change management process for Horizon. Would you have time for a 15-minute chat this week at any point? And your response, hi, Eleanor. Thank you for this. It's certainly the case that in the cases referred to us, there has been no evidence at all of Horizon being the reason for any losses in branch. Indeed, losses have been clearly the result of individual action. No evidence at all, clearly the result of individual action. Was that part of a culture that was open to challenge at the post office?
It was the position, as we understood it at the time, following the second site report. That
can come down. what we have seen here from 2013 onwards is year after year the same mantra. As Director of Communications, were you responsible for pursuing that mantra?
Not at all. In fact, we did a number of things that were very open. For instance, you referred to Panorama. We did a 2-hour briefing for Panorama journalists on the record with myself and Angela van den Bogaard and other colleagues as well. When the second site report was published in 2013, we published it on our website with a press release. I went on the Today programme in, I think, 2014. Apologies if that's not the correct date. It was always a fine balance, and the role of a communications director is to find that balance. And sometimes we got it right, sometimes we got it wrong. But certainly our intention throughout was to be as open as possible on these issues.
Renaming bugs, removing the word horizon, not giving interviews, evidenced over a number of years. Do you really think that that is evidence of a culture of openness at the post office?
I think when balanced with some of the other things that we did that I just mentioned, I think I'm certainly not saying it was the perfect approach to communications, for sure. I have made many mistakes, just as we all have. But I do think that we did our very, very best to be open and transparent on these issues.
Let's go back to your witness statement, please, page 10. Paragraph 28. You say, in relation to my role specifically, what we could not accept in the context of what we knew at the time was inaccurate media coverage which damaged customer and postmaster confidence in a key delivery system. Moving on, please, to paragraph 94. That's page 34. You say there, given the lack of interest from the vast majority of journalists and the apparent lack of impartiality on the part of some of those covering the issue, we believed we were acting in good faith and appropriately based on the context of what we knew at the time. Paragraph 108, please. Page 39. You say there about Nick Wallace. Mr. Wallace is a journalist who has covered these issues for many years and has been clear in his view that Post Office was in the wrong. That is his right, of course, but it naturally influenced the way we engage with him, though we were always, I believe, helpful and courteous. Paragraph 113, please, page 40. You say there, it was clear to me that the programme would be very damaging to the Post Office's reputation because it would be extremely difficult to ensure balance and impartiality. This is a witness statement that you have written this year. Weren't they, Mr. Wallace, Panorama, the ones who actually got it right?
Obviously, we now know a huge amount more than we did back then about the Horizon system. And I would actually just like to say how very, very sorry I am that this issue has caused so much pain and anguish to so many people over so many years, and particularly sorry that I and communications have played a part in prolonging that pain and anguish. When we were operating in relation to Panorama and Mr. Wallace and other journalists who approached us on these issues, we always acted in good faith based on the information that we had at the time.
That wasn't the question I was asking. The question I was asking was, weren't they the ones who got it right?
Well, as I've said, we now know from the court judgments of Lord Justice Fraser that the situation was far more difficult than we ever thought. So yes.
And throughout your witness statement, you refer to inaccurate media coverage, lack of impartiality, difficult to balance, to ensure balance and impartiality. Where do you acknowledge that, in fact, those who you are complaining about got it right?
I don't think I do acknowledge that in the statement.
Can we please have a look at poll 001737770? Could we turn to the second page, please, the bottom of the second page? An email not yet sent to you, but it is in due course forwarded to you. Hi both. Matt has been contacted by a producer at BBC Panorama. This is the 2013 programme, which is considering running a programme on the Horizon/Justice for Sub-Postmasters issue. To inform their decision on whether to run with the programme or not, he's keen to talk to someone at the NFSP in more detail about our take on the issue and about our experience of Horizon more broadly. So they've contacted the NFSP. If we scroll above, we can see eventually at page 1 it's sent to you. It's halfway down the page, please. And you say, this was never funny, but now it's beyond a joke. We really need Portland, that's Portland Communications, is it?
That's correct.
To earn their money now with some innovative and interesting ways of getting us back on the front foot. I'm not sure what we've had from them. We need some other voices in this. The journalism is appalling. Could we please look at poll 001011345? The email in the middle of the page is from yourself to Paula Venables, about 5 paragraphs down. You say as follows: to your point regarding your fellow commuters, there is this, I think. The media reports were skewed to present the picture the journalists wished to present, that of the corporate beast trampling on the downtrodden sub-postmaster. This kind of campaigning journalism is always likely to capture sympathy, and it's why they do it that way. For the reasons set out above, it wouldn't be in our interest to get into a detailed debate on the report. The problem we have is that journalists with an agenda are always going to believe second sight ahead of us. Can we please look at poll 001011629, 5th of December 2014. If we scroll down to the bottom of page 3, please. Nick Wallace called regarding an interview with Paula on Horizon for BBC News/One Show. They would like to do this tomorrow over the weekend. Basically, they got a wind of a letter that Paula sent to a number of MPs regarding the Post Office's position on the mediation system. The MPs are expected to release a response over the coming days, which will bring a large degree of information on scheme into the public domain. He hasn't seen the letter, but hopes to by the time the interview takes place. The interview will question the integrity of the system and the claims of the sub-postmasters involved. If we scroll up, please. There's an email from Melanie Caulfield on page 2 to yourself and also to Ruth Barker. And about 4 paragraphs down, she says as follows. If I could scroll down slightly, it's the paragraph beginning Belinda. She says, we can go back to Nick to reiterate previous points we've made about confidentiality of scheme, inappropriateness of interview, but off a statement along the lines pasted below. After all, he is essentially asking Paula to respond to something that hasn't even happened yet, i.e. the response to her letter. While Nick is still fishing around, we need to avoid giving him anything new, ? Happy to discuss. I'm in a meeting this afternoon, and I know you are involved in another issue. I have to leave promptly tonight for a commitment, but around in the morning. You respond. In fact, you forward it to Belinda Crowe, the bottom email, thank you. And you say, read the chain from the bottom, including the Nick Wallace call note. Sounds like members of Parliament might do something as a collective shortly. If that happens, we need to think again about whether to agree to an interview, me, not Paula. Otherwise, it could end up back in Parliament. I pretty much agree with Mel's view here, but we might need to be ready to change approach. And then the response from Belinda Crowe is, can we speak at some point about this on Monday? And then you send an email, your response to her. You say, I called, I've just seen Nick Wallace's latest email. I'm tempted to offer an interview in which we simply say in response to questions, the BBC is asking us to break the confidentiality of mediation schemes, the workings of which were agreed by all parties. This is an intolerable position. We've gone over and above responsibilities we have as a business. In 2.5 years, there has been no evidence, etc. If I stick to that line, what is the problem with doing an interview? I appreciate you may think I'm sliding, but I can't sit and take this garbage much more. Turning, please, to poll 0010262, 23rd of January 2015, if we scroll down, please. You've written an email. It's a note, and you say, I've written the below for no reason other than it made me feel better. And we'll come back to this email. But you say as follows, it's fascinating to be part of a conspiracy, to be at the heart of a corporate cover-up, but frustratingly too, when the reality is a hard story to tell and some distance from the picture painted by a determined band of adversaries. In our case, we're up against a campaign group, a few journalists, mainly from the BBC, and some MPs. And you have to hand it to them. They know what they're doing in terms of mounting a campaign. It's just that, whisper it quietly, all is not what it seems. One final email before I get to the question. Poll 00111699. Much later on, 21st of February 2019. An email from yourself to Paula Venables and others. And you say as follows, our external communication strategy on this is to minimize negative coverage by holding the robust line we have deployed throughout. In doing so, we've thus far succeeded in minimizing coverage in the mainstream media. Throughout the trial, we have been measuring sentiment among external audiences. The trial has had no discernible impact in terms of increasing external interest in this issue. There are a group of journalists who have staked their professional reputations on campaigning on behalf of those who have now taken us to court. They, and one in particular, drive most of the periodic increases in external coverage. We have sought to engage with this group, but there is an unwillingness to engage with our side of the story. That is regrettable, of course. You then say, Private Eye has also featured the issue regularly, claiming Post Office has knowingly covered up evidence of what it calls the deeply dodgy Horizon system. We believe the content in Private Eye is almost certainly provided to it by one of the campaigning journalists who have staked their reputation on proving that Post Office has conspired to see otherwise innocent people jailed or penalised. By holding our line and not giving the story further oxygen, we prevent the issue going beyond the channels above. And while, of course, it is uncomfortable when we face negative coverage, it has never reached a stage of immediate onslaught as seen on other such issues facing organisations such as ours. Email after email after email blaming the journalists, isn't it?
Well, with the benefit of hindsight, they absolutely look, some of them look ludicrous. I agree.
Had you ever asked yourself, might we, in fact, be the baddies?
I've asked myself that question. I've asked myself many, many questions over this issue many, many, many times over the course of the last few months, over the course of the last few years, and throughout the whole period that I was dealing with these issues. We really believed that we were doing the right things. We'd appointed Second Sight to lead an investigation, which we thought was the right thing to do. We then created a mediation scheme because we wanted to give people the opportunity to raise the issues that they had. We advertised for people to come forward to the scheme, the mediation scheme, using our communications channels to do so. You know, we held a 2-hour briefing with Panorama. We published a press release, etc., etc. We'd really tried, and the context is that we really believed that we'd tried to do the right things.
Were you absolutely blinkered at
No.
this time? Who is the one journalist who's mentioned in this email?
That would be Mr. Nick Wallace.
Did you at any time think, actually, there might be something in what he's saying?
Of course, as I've said, I asked myself the question many, many times, and I regret that I didn't ask more questions. I wish I'd pushed harder. I wish that I'd been perhaps as hard on and as assertive with our supplier as I was with Panorama and with journalists at times, for sure. Of course, I've asked myself those questions many, many times and will continue to do so. I have a huge amount of regret over this issue and will always have that regret.
Looking at those later emails that I've showed you, the emails addressing journalists, attacking journalists, were they part of a culture of openness?
I think it's unfair to take a few emails as symptomatic of what the broader environment that I led in the communications team at the Post Office. I've always been hugely committed to openness and transparency with journalists. I was a journalist myself for 14 years. I've got a huge amount of respect for journalists and journalism. On this particular issue, absolutely, I was assertive. As I say, I regret that I was as assertive as I was. But ultimately, I'm not a technical expert. I'm not a legal expert. I had to operate based on, in good faith, on the information that I had to hand at the time, and did so in that way.
They're not just a few emails, are they, though? Because the emails that I've shown you are over several years. Emails from 2013, emails from 2014, emails from 2015, emails from before the Second Sight interim report, emails from after the interim report, and they all have a very similar line about them, don't they?
They have a very similar line in the sense that we felt that the actions that we were taking, the appointment of Second Sight, the setting up of the mediation scheme, the openness that we showed to Panorama in the initial stages of our engagement with Panorama, we felt that those issues were not being fully recognised. For instance, with Panorama, we felt that it would have been helpful if they'd have spoken to the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters, who represented 6,000 postmasters at the time, and who, I think, as the inquiry is aware, at the time didn't have any concerns about the Horizon system. And it felt as though that the journalists had an agenda, and that agenda was to say that the Post Office was in the wrong. Obviously, context and hindsight tells us that we were in the wrong. I deeply regret that that's the situation.
Do you think that the Post Office did enough investigating of its own to look into the problems with Horizon?
Well, self-evidently, I don't think enough investigation went into it. It's not really a question for me as communications director.
Well, you were communicating that very message, weren't you? That Horizon was robust, nothing to see here. Surely you can have an opinion as to whether the Post Office carried out enough investigations, and frankly, whether you personally looked into matters enough.
No, well, I mean, clearly not enough investigation went on, because issues have emerged in the course of the last few years that have shown that the Horizon was had far more faults, far more bugs in it than we ever realised and ever understood at the time. So absolutely, for whatever reason, the correct levels of investigation didn't take place. I agree with that. As I've said, I regret deeply that I didn't do more to question internally. I always insisted that our communications team, we weren't just effectively a post box for information. If if colleagues told us something, we would scrutinise it and push back. I wish we'd pushed back harder. I wish I'd pushed back harder.
I'm going to move on to the topic of second sight. Can we begin with poll 00164510? This is an email from Hugh Flemington to Alwyn Lyons, yourself, Roderick Williams, Jarnail Singh and Leslie Sewell. Number one, we have a new criminal case starting in Birmingham next Monday, and that's a matter that we have seen with other witnesses. Jarnail to get Cartwright King up to speed, using Alwyn to enable Cartwright King to say something to the judge regarding bugs. Post Office have found and disclosed. Post Office have found them, not second sight. That's an important point. That's an important PR point. Just pausing there, and we'll see it often repeated that Post Office had found the bugs. Were you aware as to whether it was Gareth Jenkins or the Post Office who had notified second sight about bugs in the horizon?
I may have been aware, I don't recall.
Do you ever recall asking anybody whether it was correct that the Post Office found the bugs and notified second sight?
I recall that I was told that Post Office had found the bugs and told second sight. I don't recall whether I questioned that or not. I would like to think I did, but I can't possibly recall whether I did or not.
So using Alwyn to enable Cartwright King to say something to the judge regarding the bugs Post Office have found and disclosed. Post Office have found them, not second sight. That's an important PR point. To what extent is a PR point relevant to a Crown Court judge?
Well, that would be a question for Mr. I'm sorry, who's this email from?
It's from Hugh Flemington.
That would be a question for Mr. Flemington. I mean, I would place a Crown Court judge very high above a PR point.
And fact that a second sight interim report may be coming out before the MP's summer recess, 16th of July, to offer the judge the chance to adjourn the case. That just makes us look open and transparent and seems the prudent thing to do. Number two, Mark D. Could we prepare an on-the-offensive communications statement to go out on Monday? And we send out letters to relevant affected sub-postmasters or ex-sub-postmasters of the 14 bug on Monday too. Now, this is something that we've seen with other witnesses. There were these two bugs, what were referred to there as the 64 and the 14 bugs, and there are letters that are going out to affected sub-postmasters. Do you recall that issue?
I recall the issue in relation to the second sight interim report. I don't, in all honesty, recall this specific. I mean, I've seen this email since it was disclosed, obviously, but I didn't. When I saw it this time, it didn't ring a bell.
It says, Mark D, can we prepare an on-the-offensive communication statement? Do you think it was appropriate to prepare an on-the-offensive communication statement when the Post Office was notifying sub-postmasters or former sub-postmasters of those two bugs?
As I say, I don't recall this email. I don't find that language particularly. I'm not keen on that.
What would you have understood on the offensive to have meant?
Well, I suspect he's suggesting that we do a proactive press release of some kind to set out these issues. But I honestly don't recall what actually happened as a result of this email.
The comms statement to include the Post Office found the bugs and told second sight, i.e. second sight didn't find them. Post Office are being open about them. Get Fujitsu to confirm bugs don't affect the transaction data. There's then a board meeting a couple of days later. Can we please look at poll 00021515? Now, we may see other board minutes. You're down as in attendance. Were you regularly in attendance at board meetings?
I attended board meetings on a fairly regular basis, but not routinely.
And who invited you to those board meetings, generally?
I would generally be invited, well, by the chair, but Paula would have passed on the request.
Did you have a personal relationship with the chair?
I think, as is known to the inquiry, I worked for a time for the chair's husband.
And that was Jack Straw.
That's correct.
And was she your link to the post office? Did you join because of her, or?
I heard about the vacancy at the post office and applied. Went through a rigorous recruitment process, which involved, I think, 2 or possibly 3 interviews plus an assessment day. So I certainly heard about the vacancy through my connection, but
Through which connection, sorry?
Through the fact that I'd previously worked for Jack Straw.
And who told you about the vacancy?
I don't recall.
How do you recall that you heard about it through that connection?
I think I was approached. I honestly can't remember, Mr. Blake. I think I was either approached by a headhunter potentially, or it could have been that it was mentioned to me by Mr. Straw. I honestly can't recall.
Well, if it was through the connection, then it wouldn't have been a headhunter, would it?
I think, obviously the headhunter was if it was a headhunter, and I genuinely can't recall, they would have recalled that I worked, or they would have known that I'd worked for Jack Straw, and that Alice Perkins was the chair of the post office.
Returning to these minutes, at this particular meeting, is there a lawyer present?
No.
Do you recognise any IT specialists present?
No.
If we scroll down, please, there is the section on Horizon. I'm going to just read a couple of paragraphs from that. A, the CEO apologised for the short notice in keeping the board updated, but explained that issues had arisen over the last couple of days. She gave an update on the Horizon review, which was being undertaken by Second Sight, and their interim report, which was to be presented at a meeting of members of Parliament on the 8th of July. The investigation to date had found no systemic issues with the Horizon computer system, but had highlighted areas for improvement in support areas such as training. The CEO explained that the Horizon, like any large computer system, would occasionally have anomalies, and 2 were known of over recent years. The business had dealt with these anomalies to ensure no sub-postmaster was out of pocket, and these anomalies had not affected any of the cases which Second Sight had reviewed. Second Sight had been told of these anomalies, and they would include them in their report. Over the page, please. The CEO was concerned that the report from the independent forensic accountants was not as factual as expected and could lead to loose language at the MP meeting. The board asked the business to challenge Second Sight to ensure changes were made to the report where possible, and asked the business to prepare their communication to combat any inaccuracies. And we have their action, CEO/Mark Davies. Why were you personally tasked with changing the report of an independent investigation?
I don't think I was. I think the action that refers there in D is to the business to prepare their communication to combat any inaccuracies. I don't believe that, and I certainly didn't take it, that I was being asked to challenge Second Sight to ensure changes were made to the report.
Do you recall seeing any copies of the report before it was published?
I don't recall.
Do you recall making any proposals to change a draft of the report?
I'm as certain as I can be that I didn't.
Do you think it is unusual, given the context, that the only 2 named people for action here are yourself and the CEO?
Is it possible to just scroll back to who was in attendance at the meeting,
Yes.
Mr. Blake, if possible? I'm surprised, looking at that list of attendees, that Susan Crichton wasn't there. at the time, because my understanding or my recollection is that she sort of held the relationship with Second Sight at that time. So I'm surprised that she's not listed as being present.
Do you recall the relationship with Susan Crichton and the board at this time?
No, I don't.
Are you aware of any reason why she might not have been present at the board?
I'm not, no.
Have you heard any suggestions relating to why she might not have been at the board?
No.
Can we please look at poll 00296941? And this is a draft briefing to Paula Venables of the 1st of July. So the same day. Is this a document that you recall?
Only since I've seen it disclosed for the inquiry. I may have seen it when it was first produced, but I cannot recall if I did or not.
If we scroll over the page, it's a briefing on the Second Sight review, interim report. Is it likely that you would have seen this at the time?
I think it's likely.
Could we please turn to page 6? Bottom of page 6 into page 7 is the forward strategy. Plan A, meet James Arbuthnot and try to persuade him to postpone his meeting with Second Sight on Tuesday the 9th of July. If not successful, Plan B, we are preparing a full communication strategy and will consider rebuttal and tactics in line with an approach aimed to minimise reputational impact to Post Office Limited. Do you recall there being this Plan B?
Oh, absolutely. In terms of the Second Sight report, though, as with any major report which would have had external focus, I would have been asked to come up with to work with my team to produce a communications strategy, and I think that's not unusual at all.
It certainly reads as though Plan B is to go against Second Sight. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't agree with that. It's on the contrary. Actually, it was more. I do recall that at the time I was extremely keen that we were very open about the Second Sight report. I can't say whether it was my idea that we published the Second Sight report externally, but I certainly was very supportive of that, as I was supportive of issuing a press release to go on the same day as the Second Sight report being published.
Rebuttal and tactics sound very much like the plan was to rubbish Second Sight's findings.
That's absolutely not correct.
If we scroll down, please, we have key messages. It says for you to review and amend as necessary, so it's likely that this did land on your desk.
Oh, very likely, yeah.
With respect to the 62 branch and 14 branch anomalies, points to be made are, for example, we found the anomalies. The anomalies were detected, resolved, and we communicated the problem to sub-postmasters. Do you recall who was responsible for developing these points?
Well, my team would have been, and my team would have been responsible for developing a press release based on the report, but not, so where it says there with respect to the 62 branch and 14 branch anomalies, we would have been asked to take these points into consideration as we developed a press approach, a press release, which I think was then, well, I know was then developed. Obviously, that wouldn't be done in isolation of the wider business, as no piece of communications ever was done in isolation of the wider business. It would have been a collaborative approach across the business, including, obviously, legal, IT, network, security, etc., etc. And imagine, in this case, although obviously it's around, I think it's 11 years ago, I imagine Fujitsu, we would have liaised with the Fujitsu press office as well, which we did as a matter of course on these matters too.
Can you assist us with that? You say as a matter
Sure.
of course, so you regularly liaised, you had a counterpart at Fujitsu who you liaised with?
Yes, of course. So the post office, it might help the inquiry if I just set out briefly what the post office communications team comprised of. I mean, it comprised of a press office of, I think, 4 or 5 press officers, a stakeholder management team who worked with MPs and councillors and other stakeholders, an internal communications team which obviously was responsible for internal communications with our colleagues, our employed colleagues, but also our franchise colleagues and the postmaster community as well, and then the people who put together the website and other elements too. So whenever a report such as this one, and there were many reports and press initiatives during the time I was at the post office, were developed, they would effectively come to us, whichever part of the business was leading on the issue, would come to us and say, we need a press strategy, a media strategy, and an internal communication strategy for it as well. So we would then work with whichever part of the business that was to put together the relevant materials. So it might be a press release, it might be an internal communications piece, and I think for the second site report, from my recollection is, and I'm sure it's the case, that we produced a press release, but we would have also produced internal communications materials as well to talk to the business, to tell the story of what was happening in relation to the second site report. So does that help?
Well, Mr. Davies, the impression that you're giving is certainly one where you were just effectively carrying out the orders of others within the business. But we saw at the board that you were actually specifically tasked with the response, weren't you, at board level?
Specifically tasked with the response in terms of creating the communications package, absolutely.
So it wasn't just a press release, it wasn't anything part of your usual day-to-day work. This was a board-level direction for you to personally direct the response to the second site interim report.
I think it's really important to say that the media response, so creating a press release, creating an internal communications messaging, I think to go back to the board meeting, it is absolutely not the case that I was tasked with trying to persuade Second Sight to change their report. That did not happen. What did happen was that I was tasked with creating a press, media, communications response, absolutely.
And you were mentioning Fujitsu. Who did you liaise with at Fujitsu?
I don't recall, sorry, you did ask me that question, apologies. I don't recall specific names, and most of the communication between my team, the press office team, would have been directly between my press office team and the Fujitsu press office team. And obviously Fujitsu, like any other organisation, like the post office, had its own media team.
Did you have somebody who you could pick up the phone to at Fujitsu?
There were, I don't recall names, but I dealt with the director of communications, I think it was at the time. I don't recall names, though, apologies.
And would you feed them technical questions, for example?
No, I mean, most of the sort of day-to-day questions on technical matters would go via my press office, our press office, the communications press office, absolutely. I didn't get involved in dealing with technical questions myself, but any technical questions that were being fed to Fujitsu would also be fed through the IT team as well. So it was a collaborative approach. There wasn't a sort of separate set of people asking questions and another set of people asking questions, if that makes sense.
Given that you were responsible for the strategy, why do you say that you weren't getting involved with the technical matters? Wasn't that quite an important part of your job?
Well, essentially, the second site report would be presented to us, and we would then take that report, and then build out a press release from the report, and then in doing so liaise with other colleagues within the post office and also with Fujitsu. So we wouldn't be taking raw material ourselves and creating material ourselves. We would be building out from the existing report.
Can we please look at poll 00029627? This is the very next day, and it's a later draft of the same briefing note. Can we look at page 6, please? Bottom of page 6 into page 7. So we see at the very bottom, the forward strategy, the wording has slightly changed there because plan A, it now says this is unlikely to be successful. So by the day after the board meeting, it seems as though the likely scenario is that you're going to have to prepare a full communications strategy. Do you recall that?
I really don't recall the interplay between the meeting with Mr. Lord Arbuthnot, as he is now, and the communication strategy. I don't recall those two things being connected. I think our intention always was that we would publish the second site report.
Do you think it may be surprising that by that stage your plan was to rebut and to develop tactics in respect of a firm of independent investigators that had been instructed by the Post Office to carry out an independent investigation?
No, because rebuttal and tactics would refer to what questions we might receive off the back of the second site report. So we would receive questions relating to the report. So we would therefore have, and where it says rebuttal, that effectively means a Q&A, a set of questions and answers that we would expect to be asked by journalists or others. Tactics is really about whether would we do TV interviews about it, would we do radio interviews about it, would we put out an internal communications plan, would we contact MPs other than Lord Arbuthnot, those sorts of considerations. So it doesn't strike me as surprising.
Aiming to minimise reputational impact on Post Office in respect of an independent report. I'll go back to the questions that I was asking first today, which is, do you think that that was part of a culture of openness?
I think that managing reputational risk for any large organisation such as Post Office is a fundamental part of the communications team, along with facilitating responses, along with informing key audiences about new products, about the performance of the business, etc., etc. Minimising reputational risk is part and parcel of communications, the communications profession.
Thank you. So that might be an appropriate time to take our morning break.
Yes, by all means.
Thank you very much.
Let me just check.
I think 12:05.
11. Okay, yeah.
Sorry,
fine.
11 even. Sorry. Thank you, sir. Can we please turn to poll 001898880? We're on the same day, the 2nd of July 2013, and you have drafted a statement and you are seeking comments from various people. Could we please look at the statement? It's poll 001898881. I'm just going to read to you from the statement quite a lot of text that I will go through. It starts, draft Post Office statement on Horizon system. An interim review into concerns around the computer system used in the Post Office branches has concluded that there are no systemic issues in relation to the system, the Post Office has announced. The review, undertaken independently by Second Site Support Services Limited in consultation with the Post Office, James Arbuthnot MP and Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance, addressed 4 cases raised by MPs. It found no evidence of any systemic failures in the system. The Post Office now plans to invite the JFSA to work with it and Second Site to complete a review of further cases. If we scroll down, please, it says, as a result, Post Office Limited plans to create a user forum to explore these issues with the JFSA and other interested parties. The user forum will be chaired by Post Office Chief Information Officer Leslie Sewell. I'm just pausing there. Is that user forum the forum that was originally going to be described as the Horizon Forum?
I think so.
It then says, during the course of the second site review, the Post Office, assisted by its supplier Fujitsu, has engaged with Second Site to provide evidence around the use of the Horizon system. This included details of where accounting shortages or overpayments have occurred as a result of minor issues in the system. This amounted to 2 sets of transactions, one impacting 62 of the Post Office's 11,800 branches between March and October 2010, and the other affecting 14 branches due to an anomaly within with accounting entries for 2010/11 being incorrectly reproduced in 2011/12 and 2012/13. The accounting anomalies in these cases were picked up by the Horizon system. Post Office proactively informed the sub-postmasters, and any losses, however minor, were reversed. You then have an announcement from Leslie Sewell. It says, Leslie Sewell said, "We're grateful to James Arbuthnot MP for his support for the Second Sight review and to Second Sight themselves for their work. The Post Office takes its responsibilities, whether to customers, sub-postmasters, staff or taxpayers, very seriously, and it is right that we took the steps to ensure that claims about the Horizon system were reviewed. Having done so, Second Sight has confirmed that there are no systemic issues in the computer system. We will, of course, continue to work with them and with the JFSA to examine other cases put to us." And it continues. At the time that you drafted this statement, had you read the Second Sight report?
I'm sure I had, yes.
Can we please turn to page 1 of this document and also bring onto screen, alongside it, the Second Sight interim report, and that is POL 000999063. Thank you. So we have now on the left-hand side the Second Sight report. Could we please turn to page 5 on the left-hand side, page 5 of the interim report? Thank you very much. If we could scroll down to 6. Thank you. Did defects in Horizon cause some of the losses for which sub-postmasters or their staff were blamed? It says, there is still much work to be done on the cases Second Sight has been asked to investigate. We have concluded in one of the 4 spot reviews, so that's a quarter of the reviews carried out, covered by this interim report, that although the Horizon system operated as designed, the lack of timely, accurate and complete information presented to the sub-postmaster was a significant factor in his failing to follow the correct procedure. In that incident, shortcomings in the branch's primary and fallback telecommunications equipment exposed a weakness that led to a poor counter-level experience both for the sub-postmaster and his customer. It then refers to another spot review, and then at 6.4 it says, in the course of our extensive discussions with the Post Office over the last 12 months, the Post Office has disclosed to Second Sight that in 2011 and 2012, it has discovered defects in Horizon Online that had impacted 76 branches. Over the page, please, thank you. It says, the first defect, referred to as the receipts and payments mismatch problem, impacted 62 branches. It was discovered in September 2010 as a result of Fujitsu's monitoring of system events. The aggregate of the discrepancies arising from this system was £9,029. The second defect, referred to as the local suspense account problem, affected 14 branches and generated discrepancies totaling £4,486. And then it says this, at 6.7 onwards. The Post Office was unaware of the second defect until a year after its first occurrence in 2011. It reoccurred and an unexplained shortfall was reported by a sub-postmaster. Post Office's initial investigations in 2012 failed to reveal the system defect, and because the cause could not be identified, the amount was written off. Fujitsu looked into the matter in early 2013 and discovered and then corrected the defect. It seems, however, that the shortfalls and surpluses that occurred at the first occurrence in 2011 resulted in branches being asked to make good incorrect accounts. The Post Office has informed us that it has disclosed in witness statements in English courts information about one other subsequently corrected defect or bug in the Horizon software. Now, on the right-hand side, can we please scroll down to the passage that begins with "this included details"? Thank you. In your draft press release, after having read the second site report, you say as follows: "This included details of where accounting shortages or overpayments have occurred as a result of minor issues in the system. This amounted to 2 sets of transactions." And you say in the first of these cases, 17 sub-postmasters were affected and later reimbursed. And the second set of cases, the total impact was XXX. The accounting anomalies in these cases were picked up by the Horizon system. Post Office proactively informed the sub-postmasters, and any losses, however minor, were reversed. Is that correct?
It would seem that's not correct in that draft press statement.
Because they weren't picked up for, in some cases, a significant period of time.
It appears that that statement has to some degree sort of, collapsed a load of different elements into one, and yeah, it would appear to be inaccurate, that.
Yes. And there's also no mention there of the additional bug, is there?
No.
On the left-hand side, if we scroll down to frequently reported issues, they set out at 7.2, "The following issues have been reported to us by multiple sub-postmasters as being of particular concern about the Horizon system. A multi-product system that's far more complex and demanding than, for example, that found in a typical high street bank, multiple transactional interfaces, unreliable hardware leading to printer failures, screen misalignment, and failed communications links, the complexity of end-of-trading period processes, inexperienced trainers and gaps in training coverage, the lack of some form of on-site supervision and quality control, the receipt of centrally input overnight corrections and other changes allegedly not input by sub-postmasters or their staff, inadequate help desk support with responses that are script-based and sometimes cause further or greater problems, Post Office investigation and audit teams that have an asset recovery or prosecution bias and fail to seek the root cause of reported problems, a contract between sub-postmasters and the Post Office that transfers almost all of the commercial risk to the sub-postmasters, but with decreasing support being provided. In its risk-reward decision-making, the Post Office benefits from any savings, whilst the sub-postmasters may suffer increased risk. Are those concerns of Second Sight reflected in the draft announcement that I have just taken you to on the right-hand side?
They're only reflected in the sense that we highlight the need for improvement in terms of training and support, etc., and the response to be to create the user forum to look into those issues and others. And of course, I think the other thing I'd say is that we also intended and did publish the entire Second Sight report. So all of those things as set out were on the record, on the public record. And by its nature, sorry to continue, and by its nature, the press release was a summary, if you like, of the overall report.
Well, you've already accepted it was an inaccurate summary in relation to bugs, errors, and defects in the system.
Yeah, I hope that's a draft press statement. I obviously haven't seen the final press statement. I don't recall it. I hope those anomalies, those mistakes would have been picked up. If they weren't, then that's a matter of really grave regret. I suppose. Sorry.
Your evidence was that you drafted it having read the report that is on the left-hand side of our screen. It's pretty clear that you are putting a very positive spin on the Second Sight report, aren't you?
I think it's a summary of the report.
Well, it's not a summary. It's an inaccurate summary of the report, isn't it?
There are points in there that I would, if I was writing it again, I would absolutely be much clearer about, yeah.
Not clearer. There are points that are actually just wrong, aren't there?
Yes.
If we stick to the left-hand side and scroll down, please, to paragraph 8 on page 8. Preliminary conclusions. So a big header, preliminary conclusions. This is an interim report, and there is much work still to be done. Any conclusions reached at this point will need to be updated in the light of new information that arises as the investigation continues. Our preliminary conclusions are: A, we have so far found no evidence of system-wide systemic problems with the Horizon software. If we look at the right-hand side and scroll up to the top of that page, please, you'll recall, I read it out. It says, an interim review into concerns around the computer system used in post office branches has concluded that there are no systemic issues in relation to the system. And then it says in the third paragraph, it found no evidence of any systemic failures in the system. Does your proposed statement say anywhere that there was much work still to be done?
No. I say Second Sight has called on the Post Office to examine its information technology training support, but no.
Does it say anywhere that the conclusions are preliminary?
No. It describes it as an interim review, but no.
Does it say anywhere that the suspense account problem took years to correct?
No.
Does it say anywhere that there was a third bug in the system that was identified?
No.
Is the word defect or bug used anywhere in your statement?
I don't recall how we refer to them. If it's possible to scroll down.
Absolutely.
I presume not, but...
I mean, for example, this included details of where accounting shortages or overpayments have occurred as a result of minor issues in the system. This amounted to 2 sets of transactions. I mean, do you think that your draft statement that was drafted after reading the Second Sight report was in any way an accurate reflection of what Second Sight had found?
I think if I was writing it again, I would write it more, I would be clearer.
Is that because you would now be more ethical than you were at the time?
No.
You have entirely removed the sting from the report, haven't you?
No, I don't believe so. And I think, again, I'd say that because we were publishing the report itself in its entirety, I think it's reasonable to say that the report would therefore be in the public domain.
You were working for a company that was wholly owned by the government. Did you think that it was appropriate in those circumstances to spin the report in this way?
I reject the word spin. I wasn't seeking to spin. I don't recall whether this is the final press release that we issued. I don't know what processes it went through after this point, and it probably went through a number of different colleagues. I was seeking, probably too hurriedly, to put together a summary of the report, but absolutely doing so in full and certain knowledge that we would be publishing the full report. So it would be there for the public and others to draw their conclusions.
Mr. Davies, I won't use the word spin. Did you think it was appropriate to lie the way that you have on the right-hand side in the press release?
I don't believe that I've lied there.
Do you think working for a company that was wholly owned by the government, that is an appropriate press release to have drafted, having read the report on the left-hand side?
I think if I'm guilty of anything there, it's of being sloppy. I've never lied in my entire career, and certainly didn't lie at any point during this, over this issue either.
Can we please return to an email that we looked at this morning? It was Pol 002977030. And if we look at page 3, please. This is, if we scroll down, we can see that Susan Crichton has sent around a brief of Paula Venables and Alice Perkins, 2nd of July 2013, so same day. And if we scroll up, please. It's a brief for a meeting between Alice Perkins and Paula Venables and Lord Arbuthnot that has been produced by Alwyn Lyons and Susan Crichton just prior to the release of the Second Sight report. If we scroll up, please, to page 1, bottom of page 1. So this is an email from yourself. I took you to it this morning where you say the speaking note needs to be firmer. We want to make clear our position and underline our view that no evidence to support the systemic failures. If we scroll down, please. You say on training, we need to be very careful about language. The current version is too loose. This is your point about not leaving any glimmer which suggests that cases might need to be reopened. So we need to acknowledge that training can always be improved rather than our training must be improved, important difference, and need to follow that with further statement that there is no evidence of systemic failures. The brief needs to make clear that none of the 14 or the 62 impact on the spot reviews in the interim report and are therefore not relevant to the interim report. And this is the passage I took you to earlier. We shouldn't call the user group a Horizon user group. Makes it appear as we are acknowledging issue with Horizon. Branch manager user group, question mark. You then say a bit further down, it may be worth setting out 3 overall rocks for the 2 of them to return to. 1, there is no evidence in the interim report to support any suggestion of systemic failures. 2, this is a system which deals with 6 million transactions a day, or more than 40 million a week, and is used by more than 50,000 people every day. 3, we must be satisfied that when the report is released, it truly reflects the position. The post office business is too important to too many people for faith to be questioned unfairly. Another point which needs bringing out is the public money point. We do have a duty to protect public money, and where there's wrongdoing, we must act. It would be entirely wrong if we did not. We want to support our people, and we will make sure that we do everything we can to improve training and support in order to ensure that their stewardship of public funds cannot be questioned. This is more than just drafting of a press release, isn't it? You are here carrying out the task that was proposed at the board meeting to take forward the entire strategy with regards to the response to the Second Sight interim report.
Can I clarify? This email is relating to the speaking note for Lord Arbuthnot, is that right?
Yes.
So it's not in relation to the press release?
No, well, it's the same day, and it follows the board meeting the day before, where you've been tasked with, you say, a communications response. But it does very much seem as though by the 2nd of July, you were getting involved in the company's response. You weren't simply issuing press releases. You were actually involved in developing a strategy for the company and developing here rocks to return to.
I mean, the company's position would be the position as set out in the press release. They weren't separate pieces of work. So
the press release would lead the company's position?
It would.
Do you think that was appropriate?
Well, I haven't seen the final press release that was issued. I would, if that draft release that we've seen was the final release, then clearly not, and I take full responsibility for that. But in terms of the sort of broader company position, as set out here, there was no evidence in the interim report to support any suggestion of systemic failures. And we were operating at the time with with no indications at all from the 6 million transactions every day and the 50,000 people using it that there was an issue with the system. And it was really important, really important that we, for a business as important as the Post Office, to so many millions of people, so many millions of customers, but obviously also clients as well, not to mention postmasters, that we were absolutely clear about our view at the time about the Horizon system, which leads to the public money point as well. And I think those 4 rocks are reasonable and justified in the context of what the report had told us.
Mr. Davies, shouldn't a company sit down, develop its strategy, and then the communications team communicate that? Well, what's happening here is the communication team are developing the corporate strategy. In fact, the head of the communications team is developing the rocks to rely upon, aren't you?
No, that's not the case at all. It's not how communications teams operate, and certainly not in my experience. Anyway, obviously the communications team has a significant part to play in the development of the position that the company would take externally, and of course responsibility for issuing press releases, for developing press releases, and for making suggestions and strategic and tactical elements of any external communication is obviously a fundamental part of a communications team. That doesn't mean that it operates separately from the rest of the business, and it certainly didn't at the Post Office. I'm putting my 2 penneth in here, if you like. I can't recall where we ended up with the final press release, but it's certainly the case that obviously, communications was an influential part of a wider company structure, of course, which included IT, network, and obviously the CEO and others as well.
You see, there's not very much involvement in the IT team in these kinds of messages, is there? And that might have been useful. But
well, I
this
think
is the communications team developing the rocks.
Apologies, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think the IT team would have absolutely been involved in developing the position. I think Leslie Sewell was on that initial draft press statement, and obviously I would never want a communications team to put out information that was incorrect from an IT perspective.
Can we please turn to poll 00190546, starting at page 2. You are there sending internally a draft letter to James Arbuthnot following the meeting this morning. Alwyn is writing up her notes, so we may flesh it out further, but grateful for immediate thoughts and amendments, please. Were you present at that meeting with James Arbuthnot?
I don't recall. I did attend at least one meeting, I think, with Lord Arbuthnot, but I don't know if it's this specific one.
If we scroll up, please, to the bottom of page 1, Susan Crichton has provided some comments. And if we scroll up to the very top, you say as follows: thanks for all the comments on the letter. I've attached a 3rd draft, which I hope is final. It has added an important section on the exceptions, which I need clearing, and comments from all those copied tonight or first thing tomorrow, if possible, please, and sorry. Exceptions, is that bugs?
Yes.
Who did you expect on that copy list to be the person to help you clear the section on exceptions?
Well, Leslie Sewell was the CIO at the time. That would be, she'd be the person that I'd expect there, yeah.
Can we please turn to poll 00190547? And this is the draft letter that is attached to this email. To Lord Arbuthnot, thank you for your time yesterday. I felt it was a very useful meeting and thought it would be helpful to follow it up by putting together this note of the key points. Scrolling down, there's a section on the second site review and next steps. As you know, the draft report we expect to receive on Friday represents the conclusion of the interim review by Second Sight into 4 specific cases. We will, of course, take on board its findings where it's possible to do so. In particular, we are keen to work even more collaboratively with the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance to conclude the Second Sight review. We believe this is critically important. Just pausing there, do you think that that was an honest reflection of the company's position at that time?
In the sense of wishing to work collaboratively with the JFSA and others to conclude the Second Sight review?
Yes.
Yes, I do.
If we go over the page, we have the section on exceptions, otherwise known as bugs. We discussed the small number of exceptions or anomalies. That is, I took you to, the very first document I took you to was the email from Paula Venables, who had spoken to her husband, who suggested the terms exceptions or anomalies. That's that language now incorporated into your corporate documents and draft letters. Do you recall doing that intentionally?
I don't recall doing it intentionally. Clearly, I have done.
Small number of exceptions or anomalies which Post Office had brought to the attention of Second Sight during its review and which had been dealt with in the appropriate way, namely that they were picked up by the Horizon computer system, corrected, and sub-postmasters were contacted where it was relevant to do so. Was that right?
I think that's correct.
We saw earlier how long it took to correct those issues. Do you think that that is, again, I know you object to the word spin, but do you think that that is a full and frank description or summary of what happened?
Oh, I think this is a summary of a meeting with Lord Arbuthnot. In the context of a summary, I think this is fair.
We then, if we scroll down, get to a section on remote access. Access to live data. Did you draft this section?
I can't recall if I drafted that section or not.
Reading the words there, is it likely that you drafted that section?
I think it's unlikely.
You sent around the first draft letter to James Arbuthnot following the meeting. This is a draft of that letter. Why do you think it's unlikely that you drafted that section?
I suspect that in drafting the letter, I've probably talked to colleagues in the IT team on this specific issue around access to live data and incorporated their response on this particular issue around remote access into it.
So in fact, is your evidence that you are likely to have drafted it, but just with input from others?
Yes.
And you say, finally, during our meeting, you also asked us about an email which has been brought to your attention having come up during the Second Sight review. I've looked into this and can provide you with the following on this issue. The email was released to Second Sight alongside many others after they requested email access to the system testing team based in Bracknell. The email in question was sent by a junior business analyst to a wide distribution list, including some members of the test team. It contained the following words: although it's rarely done, it is possible to journal from branch cash accounts. There are possible product and branch accounting concerns about how this would be perceived and how disputes would be resolved. Second Sight have asked us whether this indicates that the Bracknell test team had access to live data. This is not the case. And if we scroll down, it says, it is not possible to automatically send accounting updates from PulseApp system to the Horizon system. If changes do need to be made, this can only take place with the agreement and acceptance of any change by the relevant sub-postmaster, what we call the transaction correction process. In the case discussed in the email, there was no change in the sub-postmaster's cash position, therefore no transaction correction would have been required. Who do you think provided you with this information?
I can't recall. Apologies.
Are you able to assist with which department provided you with that information?
Well, it would have been from within the IT team. So, I mean, I think Leslie Sewell's team would have been the team that would have input into that part of this, of what is a draft letter for, I assume, for Paula to send to Lord Arbuthnot.
And did you yourself carry out any investigations or inquiries further than asking the IT team?
Well, insofar as I asked the IT team for their position in response to that section in italics on the page, I mean, they were, I have asked the question of a technical team in response to that specific question around products and branch accounting concerns, and that's the response that I've received. And I'm not a technical expert, I'm a communications expert, and so I had to rely on what I was told.
Can we please look at poll 00115973, please? We're now on the 6th of July 2013. If we scroll down, perhaps we could start on the bottom of page 3. Saturday, the 6th of July. You're emailing Paula Venables and you say, "Hi Paula, I think this points to the need for our package of measures to include 2 and possibly 3 new initiatives. 1, a branch user forum for existing users to share views, discuss issues, examine processes, etc., chaired by ExCo and reporting to ExCo, but this doesn't cover historic issues, i.e. the JFSA and MP cases, so we could also have 2. And 2 is a working party, to use Alan's phrase, to complete the MP and Justice for Sub-Postmaster Alliance cases. This could take over the second site review, perhaps involving them, but perhaps not, as they have effectively cleared Horizon, the remit of their inquiry." Just pausing there, did you really think that the second site interim report had effectively cleared Horizon?
It's a very broad summary of what they found.
It's a wrong summary of what they found, isn't it?
Well, their preliminary findings were that there were no systemic issues with Horizon.
And does that clear Horizon?
I think that's probably why I've put it in inverted commas in an email.
This would involve the JFSA and us working collaboratively on the remaining cases. If we scroll down, please, thank you. 3, a review by Mike O'Connor or Patrick Burns-Figure to consider potential independent levers which could be developed to give sub-postmasters a means of independent adjudication or non-statutory ombudsman. And you say this package, it feels to me, covers all bases. It looks ahead to fix internal issues and create independent balancing view, but it also completes the review and has the potential for doing so with Second Sight playing a different or no role. It's also a compelling package for media, which handled carefully could contain the story. It seems there that what you are doing is making proposals to take matters forward for the company to contain the story. You're making substantive proposals for the conduct of the second site or post-second site way forward.
I'm absolutely making proposals. The second site report contains some really disturbing elements in terms of the way in which postmasters had been treated in terms of training and support, and there was a huge amount of concern within the business about that, and a huge amount of concern and desire to try to fix it, to try to change the way in which we operated as a business. And so what I'm doing there is actually putting forward proposals for starting to deal with that, and there was ongoing discussions within the business about how we might address those things. Is it possible to scroll back up to the 2 points above?
Yes.
So yes, absolutely, a branch user forum to look at some of the issues that had been highlighted by Second Sight, and that was clear, that was set up. A working party, to use Alan's phrase. Well, I think in a way, what happened there was that we created the mediation scheme, and then on the 3rd point, if it's possible to scroll down, a review. Well, I guess that's the is sort of covered by the mediation scheme as well. And we were looking at whether, and it was one of the things I thought might be of interest, was whether we created some kind of ombudsman for the post office in order to look at cases where issues had come up. And I think it's entirely appropriate for me as a member of the executive of the Post Office to put forward suggestions and proposals for taking things forward. In relation to Second Sight, whether they played a different or no role, it was clear once the report was published and the Post Office Minister made a statement in Parliament that she was very clear that Second Sight should continue, and so I think that became an academic point. It is also a compelling package for media. Well, that is true. It showed that doesn't mean it's been created in order to satisfy a media demand, but it is a compelling package in the sense that it shows the business doing the right thing or seeking to do the right things off the back of the Second Sight report.
It looks very much as though what you are creating here is effectively a PR package. Would you accept that?
Not at all, no. It's not a PR package. It was an attempt to resolve the issues that had been raised by Second Sight.
And it seems to be a package, that penultimate paragraph, where it doesn't involve Second Sight, that in fact you're now seeking to move away from Second Sight.
There was well, it's not a question of whether I was looking to move away from Second Sight. There was a discussion within the business about, well, what do we do now? Second Sight has reported. Do we continue? But as I say, once the report was published and there was a statement in Parliament about it, and the Post Office Minister then made it very, very clear that she wished Second Sight to continue, it for me became an academic point because there was no way that we would want to continue, in my view, with any kind of scheme. And of course, what happened out of these discussions, and I'm not taking credit for what happened from these discussions, from this email, which then led to the creation of the mediation scheme, did involve Second Sight. So it was not a PR package at all. It was a package aimed at delivering and addressing the issues that had been raised by Second Sight.
It may be suggested that this is effectively a communications plan or scheme that's dressed up to look like it's assisting sub-postmasters.
Well, the outcome was the creation of the mediation scheme, and I don't think the mediation scheme was anything like the way you describe it.
Were you concerned about the fate of those who had been prosecuted by the Post Office?
There was obviously a debate within the mediation scheme about whether the mediation scheme could look at the cases that had been through the courts, and it was clear that mediation wasn't something that could reverse a criminal conviction. Obviously, that then played out over the course of the next couple of years.
Mr. Davies, if I could stop you there, I'm asking
Apologies.
about this particular point in time. Were you concerned about the fate of those who had been prosecuted by the Post Office?
Well, of course, if there was a claim of a miscarriage of justice, of course I was concerned, yes.
Could we scroll up, please, to the bottom of page 2? We have a response from Martin Edwards, who is the Chief of Staff to Paula Venables. He says, the boundaries between these groups are getting quite blurred and confusing, at least in my mind. And then he says at the bottom there, we also need to think about how the review of past cases by our external lawyers plays into the messaging, if at all. Certainly not something we would put in our proactive media statement, I would have thought, but would we refer to this in meetings as an avenue if pushed by MPs or the JFSA? And there is then a detailed follow-up from Paula Venables. If we scroll up to page 1, please. This is all happening very late at night. She is responding at 10:46 on the 6th of July. And she says as follows, I think we have the following, which is a variant, and she works off of your 3 suggestions, but she adds some more. 1, the working party over the next 3 to 4 months. This comprises the Post Office working collaboratively with the JFSA. And then if we scroll down, she has there, thirdly, our external lawyers review all prosecutions in the past 12 to 18 months since the Post Office has been independent of Royal Mail in light of the Second Sight finding. The Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance / Post Office Working Group reviews the findings. In brackets, why would they not review all cases of false accounting? E.g., over the last 5 to 10 years, especially where the amounts have been small, I assume large amounts would be less likely to get away with saying that they were muddle-headed and not helped. But could we review all? It is the false accounting charge James Arbuthnot was most concerned about. over the page, please. 2 was setting up of a review, the kind of review that you talked about. 3, the future introduction of an ongoing branch user group. And then she says as follows, a 4th, a statement that although the system has proved to have no systemic issues and our training, support processes and helplines have worked for most of the 50 to 60,000 colleagues over the past decade, we are nonetheless genuinely sorry that some of our sub-postmasters who were struggling did not feel we offered them sufficient help and support when they needed it, and that we are grateful to the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance and James Arbuthnot for highlighting the issues. Many are historic and already improved, but we are always open to new ways to improve how we do business to ensure the Post Office stays as trusted and effective in its communities as it ever was. Last thought, if we can draft this into something I could send to Alan Bates in confidence, it would get us to a better place in agreeing the press statement and through with James Arbuthnot on Monday. Could Martin try and corral views into a draft by Sunday early evening? The more I speak with him, the better I feel it will be. Susan, would we ever ask the lawyers to consider reviewing past prosecutions? Is that what we are talking about in one above, but simply not using the terms? If not, why would it be different? Of our 500 prosecutions, how many are for false accounting? For clarity, these are open questions, just want to know the answers, not an indication that I want us to do so. And if we scroll up, please, to the very first email in the chain, it's an email from yourself to Martin Edwards at 11:39 p.m. So you, having read that, the email from Paula Venables was 10:46, and you say, hi, mind if I try to draft this? Feel I need to keep a line through the media handling, and to be honest, we're in a danger here of going way too far. It seems very much from this email that you are trying to direct the response to the issues raised by Second Sight, and that you, in fact, are trying to formulate an approach that was less than that was wanted by Paula Venables. Is that right?
No, I don't think that's right. I'm talking to Martin, who was obviously her chief of staff on this, and Martin, I'm not sure what Martin said in response, but certainly we worked together very, very closely on all of these matters. So no, it wasn't the nature of the way in which we worked together that certain people would seek to try to direct the way in which matters were handled at all.
Paula Venables was there suggesting that our external lawyers review all prosecutions in the past 12 to 18 months. And your response to that email is that we're in danger here of going way too far. What did you mean by going way too far?
Well, I don't recall what I meant by that 11 years on, but the idea of reviewing criminal cases certainly wasn't something that I thought was a bad idea. I thought it was an extremely good idea.
Well, could I ask you to have a look at that email below if we scroll down? Just have a look at that email, and if you could let us know what it is that you thought was going way too far.
I can't recall what I felt was going way too far, and nor can I recall what the purpose of this, and you may be able to remind me what the purpose of this particular discussion is. Is this around a media release or the letter to James Arbuthnot? I'm not totally clear. I think it's a general discussion about the steps that we might want to take as a result of the Second Sight report.
We can turn to page 4.
Sure.
There's an email from Paula Venables to Alan Bates about the way forward, 6th of July. She says, Alan, thank you for the note. Yes, I thought the meeting with James was positive too. My main concern is still how we manage the publicity to avoid, as you said, it going ballistic. We had a useful conversation regarding a statement from James with quotes from you and me. So it's developing a response to that meeting following the meeting with James Arbuthnot and Alan Bates.
Thank you. Thank you.
Does that assist you with identifying how it was that you were concerned that you were going too far, or that the post office was going too far?
I genuinely don't recall where I feel that that's going too far.
The second site report was then finalised on the 8th of July 2013. Can we please now turn to poll 0019169? We're on the 11th of July. If we could scroll down, please. There's an email from yourself. It seems to yourself. Is it likely that you were just saving it, or could you have been sending it to a wider audience that were BCC'd in, or?
I don't recall. I suspect from the email above that Susan had asked me for a summary of how the second site report had been received in terms of the media, and I've probably written an email to do that and then sent it to myself. I'm not entirely sure why.
It looks as though they're different email addresses.
It may well be that I did it
yourself.
on my personal email and then sent it to myself, yeah.
Horizon report, media and parliamentary report. Our strategy in relation to media coverage was to seek to contain coverage to those outlets which have followed the issue for some time. Supported by an external agency, Portland Communications, we were successful in doing so. This meant some high-profile coverage on the BBC News at 10 on Monday and on Radio 4's Today programme, but beyond this, and a small piece in Metro, there was no other mainstream media coverage of the report. The news cycle in relation to the report lasted little over 12 hours. This is highly satisfactory, all the more so as no national newspapers followed up on the story, though we're currently dealing with a Telegraph inquiry. We decided not to accept interview requests from the BBC on the basis that doing so could give broadcasters a new line on which to run the story. I will return again to that question I asked you this morning. Do you think that that is part of an open culture?
I think it's very much part of a communications directorate's responsibilities. There's a number of elements to what the communications profession is about: informing, facilitating, but also minimising reputational risk. And one of the issues that, as I said before, we were extremely concerned about was the potential damage that stories around the system being faulty could cause to customers, to postmasters, to clients. And so minimising negative media coverage of the report was part of what my job was about.
We were also proactive in challenging inaccuracies and contacted the BBC legal team through our external lawyers to register concerns over misleading headlines. This was successful in changing headlines and rebalancing coverage. Do you think that it was appropriate for the BBC legal team to be contacted by your external lawyers in order to change headlines?
Where headlines were misleading, absolutely, yes.
Can we please turn to poll 0016190? th of July, if we scroll down, please. I'm sorry, if we could scroll up slightly. 12th of July 2013. It's an email from yourself to Paula Vennels, and you say you're proposing, I think, a line: how about, as you know, the report into Horizon was published on Monday. While there was significant coverage on the BBC, the news cycle for the issue lasts little over 12 hours, and there was little of other coverage. We have, however, been contacted by the Telegraph, which is planning a follow-up piece. We expect this article to be significant, featuring case studies of those who believe they have been wrongfully disciplined, convicted. We've worked hard this week to get our message across, including a pledge to meet with any sub-postmaster who feels they have been poorly treated. But I do expect there will be negative comment. Specifically, we are being asked to apologise to sub-postmasters. Without a final report, I judge this would not be the right course of action. Why would it have to wait for a final report to apologise to sub-postmasters?
Well, I think, and there's another email I think that you may come onto where we talk about whether or not to issue a blanket apology, and I think that's the answer to the question in a sense, is that at this point in time, in July 2013, we're in a situation where we believe the system is working well and effectively, and yes, people are making complaints about it. We're offering to meet with anyone who feels that they've been poorly treated, and I think that was the right thing, absolutely the right thing to do. But to issue a blanket apology based on what the evidence was at the time wouldn't have been the right course of action.
So were you, as the communications director, on the 12th of July 2013, advising Paula Venables, the chief executive, that she should not apologise to sub-postmasters?
That's what, yes.
It says without a final report. I mean, was it your view at that time that you might be able to influence the final report to water down Second Sight's findings, perhaps to limit their involvement, to reduce the amount of information that Post Office provided them, so it might mean that an apology wasn't necessary?
Not remotely.
From that point on, was there any genuine attempt to actually assist Second Sight?
Absolutely, as far as I know. I mean, I didn't have dealings directly with Second Sight, but my understanding always was that we sought to be cooperative and support Second Sight's work.
I'm going to take you to two documents before we break for our second break of the morning. Could we please look at poll 001920075, 15th of July 2013. I've been reflecting on our conversation on Friday around Horizon. This is to Paula Venables. The danger in reputational terms is that the issue rumbles on without conclusion, both before and after the final Second Sight report. This could really damage the business and hamper NT.
Network transformation.
Thank you. We need somehow to take the sting out of it in advance of the report. So Second Sight haven't yet reported, but you want to take the sting out of what might become their final report. We are taking the right steps in looking to the future with the working group, user forum, and independent adjudicator. But none of those will go far enough to address the damage which some believe they have suffered. These cases will continue, and the noise will be louder as the Second Sight process concludes. So I wonder whether something like the following would work. We create an independent panel to oversee cases where a sub-postmaster feels a lack of training or support contributed to an issue. We proactively invite people to submit their cases to the panel. The panel is chaired by a QC or perhaps former MP or peer. It hears evidence from a sub-postmaster and Post Office on the training and support elements and reaches a judgment. Evidence is made public. We allocate funding to compensate in cases where training and support judged to have fallen short. It looks there as though you are now trying to direct things away from Second Sight and their investigation and to instead focus on the training and support.
Not at all, no. I think this was a genuine suggestion for an approach that we could take to try to address the issues that were being raised with us. As I said, the statement in the House of Commons that was made, I think on the day that the Second Sight report was published, in which the Post Office Minister, Jo Swinson, said she was extremely keen that Second Sight continued. For me, that made that position academic, which is why I don't think I refer to Second Sight here, because I think whatever anybody within the business wanted or didn't want at that point, a commitment from the Minister in the House of Commons was really, really important. And so I think, as I say, these cases will continue and the noise will be louder as the Second Sight process concludes. And I don't think there was any remote possibility that Second Sight wouldn't be involved further following that commitment from the Minister.
You have emailed that document again to a wider group. Could we please look at poll 00192329? If we start on page 3, the bottom of page 3, Susan Crichton says, emailing Andrew Parsons and says, Andy, our comms director at the post office, Mark Davies, is keen to explore the concept of mediation. I'll send you his thoughts separately. Who is the best person at Bond Dickinson to discuss this with, and when could we do it? And if we scroll up, we can see you've there resent, on the first page, you've resent the email that I just read you to Susan Crichton, Andrew Parsons, and a team of lawyers. It does seem as though key planks of the post office policy were being driven by your communications objectives. Would you agree with that?
No, I wouldn't agree with that. It was being driven by a desire to take action based on the Second Sight report. I'd had some experience of seeing mediation in a previous role when working in government, and thought that perhaps potentially mediation might be a way forward in this instance, and that's why I suggested it. And I think as a member of the executive, it was entirely reasonable for me to do so.
And if we look down at the scrolling down on that email, it looks very much as though you've decided that the message here on in would focus on the lack of training or support rather than the Horizon system. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't agree with that, because obviously Second Sight were continuing with their work on the system. But the lack of training and support that they raised was deeply, deeply shocking. I remember vividly talking to Paula Venables about it when on the train home from work one day, and it was really, really shocking. She talked about the need for some kind of reconciliation process, and I thought she was absolutely right about that, because it was just not the kind of business that we were seeking to be. So that's where that thought came from. You know, obviously communications was my day-to-day, my bread and butter, but I was a member of the executive with a responsibility for the broader direction of the organisation, and this was an idea that I put forward.
So Second Sight's findings in relation to training and support were shocking, were they?
They were.
Were they so shocking that you included them in detail in the press release that followed the Second Sight interim report?
We published the report, and they were clear in there, and it was clear in the press release that we said that they'd identified that training and support wasn't adequate, and we, of course, took the decision to publish their report so that it was there on the public record.
Did you properly convey the shock that you and Paula Venables had in relation to the Second Sight interim report's findings in that press release?
With hindsight, no.
So that might be an appropriate moment for us to take our second morning break.
Yes, by all means. What time shall we
come back
return?
at 20 past, please.
Fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, we're going to move now to 2015. Could we please look at poll 00150,869? This is the 23rd of January 2015. If we scroll down, an email from yourself to a number of people within the post office. And you say as follows: I've been thinking about the question we will get about why we won't let Second Sight look at everything. To which the obvious answer is there's no evidence of a problem, and how can we demonstrate no evidence of a problem? And then you say, could we get details of, and you set out various things to look at. You said before that you were committed to the Second Sight investigation and their final report. It does seem there as though you are trying to justify not letting your independent investigators make up their own minds as to what they should see. Do you agree with that?
I think there were elements that that I was being advised that we wouldn't want Second Sight to have access to, and I was concerned about that because obviously, to your very point, it appears that we're not therefore giving them access to everything, and so I think I was just trying to think of ways in which we could address that issue.
Who are you saying advised you that Second Sight shouldn't look at everything?
Well, I don't recall. I don't recall I don't really recall the background to this email, if I'm very honest.
So were you, as at 2015, still committed to supporting Second Sight and their investigation?
We were absolutely committed to trying to find whether there were systemic issues with the system and to support Second Sight in doing their independent investigations of all of the cases and their role within the mediation scheme, for sure, yeah.
That sounds like a very careful answer to the question. Were you committed to supporting Second Sight in carrying out their investigation?
I personally had no reason not to be supporting them, no.
Let's go back to a document that we saw earlier this morning, poll 001020062, 23rd of January. And it's, if we scroll down, your feelings as at the 23rd of January. It's fascinating to be part of a conspiracy, to be at the heart of a corporate cover-up, but frustrating too when the reality is a hard story to tell and some distance from the picture painted by a determined band of adversaries. In our case, we're up against a campaign group, a few journalists, mainly from the BBC, and some MPs, and you have to hand it to them. They know what they are doing in terms of mounting a campaign. It's just that, whisper it quietly, it's not all what it seems. Yes, there has been a parliamentary debate. True, earnest journalists have presented breathless exposés on TV and radio, and indeed the campaign group are nothing if not determined. But you know, we've looked and looked again, and we've had legal teams look, we've turned ourselves inside out trying to see if somehow, somewhere, we've got things fundamentally wrong. We've questioned ourselves, prepared and open-minded to find scandal, error, systemic failure. I sometimes wish we had. It would all be water under the bridge by now. The issue is our computer system, the one we use to record 6 million transactions every day. Around 140 people think that it or the associated processes around it have caused them to experience financial loss at their branch. Bear in mind that almost 500,000 people have used the system since we introduced it more than a decade ago, without problems, and we know that because if there were problems, our sub-postmasters and the federation which represents them are rightly quick to tell us when they get things wrong. But we take the complaints we've had seriously, so we set up an inquiry. When that found no systemic problems, but suggested that our training and support had failed at times, we set up a mediation scheme to give people with complaints a chance to highlight issues. We invited people to come forward, and XXX did so. We then paid for them to get professional advice on making their case. Each of those cases has been re-investigated. A minority, to be exact, were cases where people had been convicted. In some of the cases, we have taken part in mediation, and in some, we reached an agreement, admitted that in training and support, we didn't do enough. But in others, we are standing firm. I've read many of the investigations, and we are right to stand firm. I'm sorry if that sounds unpleasant, but it is just, I'm afraid, the right thing to do. Of course, it's really sad when people have faced challenges in their lives. Some of those with complaints have lost homes, gone bankrupt. But it doesn't follow that the post office is responsible for those situations. As one complainant acknowledged in a letter he sent us for publication following conviction, urging others not to do what he did. He's since changed his position and blames the losses he faced on our system. I can't, though, provide more details. Each case is confidential, not a unilateral decision, but an agreed position with those representing the individual who have brought cases. This amounts, according to some of those who are as certain as they can be of our culpability, to secrecy. Despite our having shared literally thousands of pages of detail of each case, none of which, by the way, has suggested any systemic problem. This hasn't stopped MPs and journalists presenting the picture as they see it. That is their right, of course. It's just that it's only part of the picture, and the missing bits tell a very different story. A story, as I said at the beginning, that because we are doing the right thing, we can't tell which is hard. But that's how it is at the heart of this corporate cover-up. What was the purpose behind writing this?
I don't recall. I think it was an email that I wrote, I think potentially thinking maybe we could publish it or seek to publish it somewhere. I mean, obviously it looks absurd and ludicrous in the context of what we now know. I don't think it ever was published anywhere else. I'm not sure what my colleagues thought about it.
So that's the 23rd of January, and your view there was that the Post Office was alleged to be part of a conspiracy, and that there were a determined band of adversaries set against it. Was Second Sight at that time part of the determined band of adversaries?
I don't think so, no.
Could we please turn to poll 00117054? If we scroll down, please. On that first page, you have an email from yourself to Paula Venables, 26th of January, so a couple of days later. You say, "Hi, Paula. I hope you don't think I'm being too strong here, but I think Patrick's description of Second Sight is about right, given their behaviour in recent weeks. They are, I am sure, colluding with JFSA rather than acting as independent players. I've never come across anything quite like this, and I have challenged the team, but having done so, I'm now certain of it. Quite why this is the case, I'm not sure. Perhaps their heads have been filled with the notoriety/attention they are getting. But I am afraid to say that there is coalition campaigning against us, and they are part of it." Would you like to revisit the answer that you gave me a moment ago?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you for bringing that to my attention, and the dates. Absolutely right. And that does underline a concern that we started to have around Second Sight as to whether they were effectively working as independently as they should have been.
Those are strong words that follow a very strongly worded think piece in that email that we've seen. Do you think that your memory has played tricks on you a little bit in terms of your recollection of the approach to Second Sight?
Can you?
Well, it looks very much like by January 2015, the Post Office did not consider Second Sight to be an appropriate body to be investigating them.
Oh, I think you're right in that I haven't, in terms of the previous email, which I think you said was the 24th of January, and then this one. That's absolutely my recollection there has been incorrect. I absolutely did have those concerns in January 2015.
Paula Venables responds in the email above saying, "How many of the Second Sight reports have you personally read?" It looks as though that's a reference not to the interim report, but in fact to what we know as the CRR reports. We can't find a response to that email on file. Are you able to assist us with whether you responded, and if so, how many of the reports you had personally read?
I don't recall if I responded directly to that email. I did read a significant number. I couldn't give you it would be wrong to guess at a number, but I read a number of them, yes. And
at that point in time, what did you understand Ms. Venables' opinion on Second Sight to have been?
I can't recall.
Was the view that you shared below one that was commonly held within the senior leadership of the Post Office?
There was definitely a concern, yes.
Did any particular individuals strike you as being particularly prominent in that concern?
I don't recall particularly.
I want to now move on to a number of specific broadcasts and the Post Office's response to those broadcasts. Starting with the BBC coverage of the Second Sight report in September 2014. Could we please look at poll 00101329? If we look at the bottom of the page, it's an email from the 9th of September 2014 from yourself. Sorry, if we could... yes, that's fine. Dear all, further to my note on Friday, a report on the leak has been broadcast within the last few minutes on BBC Radio 4. it is inaccurate, and clearly we will be challenging these inaccuracies. We will circulate a fuller update. So this is the leak of the Second Sight interim report, is it?
No, because we published the Second Sight report, and that was in 2013.
Yes, sorry, this is 2014. So what was the leak?
I don't recall.
If we scroll up,
Sorry to interrupt. In fact, if you scroll down, I think he talks about part 2. Further to Chris's update, so this is me, about Second Sight's part 2. So it's
Yes,
presumably
sorry.
their part 2 report.
the leak of the part 2 report. Could we scroll up to, there's a further email from yourself. It says, "Dear all, the report has also been carried on Radio 5. We're having robust conversations with the BBC on accuracy issues and holding on our lines." Who would you have been having robust conversations with at the BBC?
I don't recall the specific instance, but I mean, in the case of a Radio 5 report, we would have been in touch with their news gathering department, the news desk, essentially, at BBC Radio 5 Live.
When you say we, is it likely that that would have been you personally or somebody else?
Apologies, it would be likely one of my press office team.
Do you recall the robust conversations that were had on this occasion?
I don't recall this particular instance. It may be that there are other emails that will help to remind me.
There's another email on the same day. Let's look at poll 00101337. It's the bottom of the first page, please. It's an email from yourself to, is that the communications team or the press team?
Yes, it's another, and legal. Press team, Nina, Ruth, Mel, and E. David Oliver was, I think, a program manager on the mediation scheme. Chris Ojard was general counsel, and Jessica and Piero were both from the legal team.
And you say as follows: "Hi, please specifically challenge suggestion that we acknowledge there were faults with Horizon. This is straightforwardly inaccurate, as below." And this is the form of words. It wasn't dishonesty by people like Noel, so the Post Office, at least in this independent report that they commissioned, acknowledging here that these around 150 sub-postmasters who are now pursuing claims against the Post Office may not have been at fault. So that's a transcription from the Radio 4 broadcast. And you are asking your team to challenge the suggestion that the Post Office acknowledged that there were faults with Horizon.
No, I'm asking them to acknowledge that where he said the Post Office is acknowledging here that these 150 sub-postmasters may not have been at fault, and that wasn't what the report had said.
Well, it says, so the Post Office, at least in this independent report that they commissioned, acknowledging here that these postmasters who are now pursuing claims may not have been at fault.
And
is that wrong?
yes, the Post Office wasn't at that point acknowledging that those around 150 sub-postmasters may not have been at fault.
Was the independent report that they commissioned acknowledging that those who are complaining may not have been at fault? In the second report by Second Sight.
I don't recall whether the Second Sight Part 2 report said that, but certainly we weren't acknowledging that at that point.
Another email of the same day, poll 00101365, please. So if we scroll down, there's an email from yourself to Paula Venables, and you say, "Hi Paula, the coverage is essentially suggesting that we now accept through the report that there are issues with Horizon. It is sloppy journalism in the extreme. I've spoken direct to the journalist to robustly correct the impression he is creating, and we are talking also to BBC News Gathering. I've had a huddle with Chris and the lawyers, and we hold that in our back pocket as potential action if coverage doesn't change." Did you really think that the Second Sight's second report didn't suggest that there were issues with Horizon?
Not systemic issues.
was there an allegation within that quote that we just saw before about systemic issues? Is anybody dealing here with the question of systemic issues?
I think that previous quote was saying that we acknowledged that the 150 sub-postmasters may not have been at fault, and at that point we weren't acknowledging that.
And in your email here, the coverage is essentially suggesting that we now accept through the report that there are issues with Horizon. How is reporting that there are issues with Horizon sloppy journalism in the extreme? I mean, they're right, aren't they?
There were the issues that we published or that were published in the Second Sight report, but in terms of systemic issues, which was the allegation at the time made against the Post Office that at the time we didn't have evidence to support, I think that was a fair position to set out.
Mr. Davies, you're clinging to the word systemic, and we see that in a number of emails. No systemic problems, no systemic problems. Do you think that you clung too closely to the word systemic when, quite plainly, Second Sight were saying that there were issues with Horizon?
I don't think so, because I'm not a technical expert and I'm not a legal expert, and every conversation that I had within the Post Office throughout the time I was at the Post Office suggested to me that there were no systemic issues. And so all of the conversations I had with my colleagues in the IT team and elsewhere, and all of there simply wasn't the evidence to support that there was there were systemic issues with Horizon.
Who is suggesting there are systemic issues with Horizon?
The coverage from most of the journalism that we had was saying that the Horizon system was, quote, dodgy and could have been leading to losses in branch. And we just simply didn't, at that time, have the evidence to support that.
But it could lead to losses in branch, couldn't it?
I beg your pardon?
It could lead to losses in branch. You knew that much, didn't you?
We knew that, and we'd identified those two, or the Second Sight's report had identified those particular issues. Beyond that, we were faced with a system which seemed to be working very well, with 50,000 people using it every single day, processing thousands and millions of transactions every year, and the NFSP, the Federation of Sub-Postmasters, assuring us that from their point of view, they weren't slow in complaining when there were issues that they wanted to complain about.
Mr. Davies, these are the lines that are repeated year after year after year that the inquiry has seen in document after document after document. Why can't you, in September 2014, simply accept that Second Sight had identified issues with Horizon, and you still don't seem to be able to accept that today?
I obviously, in hindsight, I accept that there were issues with Horizon, and I deeply regret that we spent so long delivering lines that turn out to be incorrect. That pains me grievously that we were in that position. I've never went into my job in any particular form as a journalist, or in the years that I've been a communications director, ever sought to mislead, ever sought to not tell the truth to journalists. So I was saying what I believe to be the situation in good faith at all times.
But you've repeated today a number of times systemic issues. All that you are raising here is that the coverage is essentially suggesting that there are issues with Horizon. Why couldn't the Post Office accept that there were issues with Horizon?
I think you have to see this email in the context of that specific quote that we talked about in the previous email, where the journalist had said that the Post Office was acknowledging that we may have been at fault in relation to 100 to 150 cases. And of course, at that time, the mediation scheme was ongoing, and we were seeking to work through cases through the mediation scheme, and we'd entered into a process of confidentiality with people as well. And so, to our minds, we were continuing with the investigation, and we were continuing to work towards finding the truth, getting to the truth.
Let's go back to the quote. It's poll 00101-337, page 2. This is a direct transcription from BBC Radio 4. Second page, please. It wasn't dishonesty by people like Noel. So the Post Office, at least in their independent report that they commissioned, acknowledging here that these around 100, 150 sub-postmasters who are now pursuing claims against the Post Office may not have been at fault. What is wrong with that?
I think my reading of it at the time was that the statement was saying that the post office was acknowledging that around 100 to 150 postmasters had a strong case to suggest that we were at fault, and that wasn't the position at the time. Clearly, with hindsight, that everything has changed, and the context is really, really important. But that's certainly how
Why does it need hindsight to read the words that are there on the page that simply says may not have been at fault? That was right, wasn't it?
Not at that point.
They may not have been at fault. May. It's a pretty low threshold, isn't it?
I think the point that we were objecting to, which I think the journalist accepted in the end, but was that the post office was acknowledging at this point that around 100 to 150 sub-postmasters may have had a case, and they were pursuing those particular claims at the time.
I'll move on to poll 00.
Before you do, Mr. Blake, let me understand this. We are here talking, are we, not about the interim report of July 2013, but something that came after it. When the words independent report are being used, that isn't a reference back to the 2013 report. It can't be, because there was no mention of 100 or 150 sub-postmasters in that. So this is something that came after it. Have I got that right?
Yes, sir.
Right. So is it the second report written by Second Sight, or what?
It's the second report, sir, yes.
Right. In that second report, did Second Sight say that 100 to 150 sub-postmasters are pursuing claims against the post office on the basis that they may not have been at fault?
I don't recall, sir, whether that report specifically made that point. The point.
Well, that's what this extract appears to be saying, doesn't it? Because it wasn't saying, in fact, that the post office in its own document had made this acknowledgement, because it says the post office, at least in this independent report that they commissioned, acknowledged. There's a big difference. And in effect, I'm repeating Mr. Blake's question to you. What was inaccurate about it, if indeed the report suggested that 100 to 150 sub-postmasters were pursuing a claim on the basis that they may not have been at fault?
My reading, sir, at the time of this particular transcript was that it was suggesting that the post office acknowledging here that these claims may not, these sub-postmasters may not have been at fault.
Well, we can all, I'm sure, and I don't mean this as a criticism of you at the moment, read words in slightly different ways, but to my way of thinking, it's simply saying that in an independent report which the post office has commissioned, they, if you like, the post office, may be acknowledging, etc., all right? But it's making it clear, surely, that it's coming from an independent report and quoting from it.
I think that's fair, sir.
All right, thank you.
Could we please turn to poll 001171883? 7th of March 2015. If we scroll down, we can see that you have sent a number of documents to that distribution list. And if we go up, there's a response from Angela van der Bogard. I think that the documents essentially announce the end of the working group and the completion of the Second Sight investigations. And she responds to, and she says, I've seen Jane's comments already and have nothing further to add on the two letters. That's a letter to Joe Swinson and to Adrian Bailey, members of Parliament. However, I do have on the press statement, and my suggested changes are in red. Those might not be the right words, but I want to indicate that we haven't simply gone through the motions, rather we've done so with our eyes wide open. And then there's a quote. This has been an exhaustive and informative process which has established that there are no system-wide problems with our computer system and associated processes. We will now look to resolve the final outstanding cases as quickly as possible. Was that correct?
The quote from Angelo?
Yes.
I think so, yes. I mean, this I think, is a report that the Post Office itself published in March 2015.
Had it established that there were no system-wide problems? The second of the second site reports.
That was certainly the view within the business, yes.
But was it correct?
To the best of my knowledge, it was correct at the time.
Moving on to the Panorama programme in 2015 and the Andrew Bridgen debate in Parliament, also around the same time. Could we please look at poll 00117433? This is an email from yourself to Alwyn Lyons. You attach a note below on the BBC Panorama and the Post Office. Is this an internal note? Yes.
Yes, I think this was probably intended for the board. Because I've sent it to Alwyn, who was company secretary. I think it was intended for her to send to the board so that they were in the picture.
I wanted to let you know that next week we expect further adverse media coverage and debate in Parliament in relation to the Post Office and our Horizon computer system. The BBC plans a Panorama programme on June the 29th, while Andrew Bridgen MP has secured a short debate in the House of Commons on the same day. It says, we expect allegations to be made which suggests that we pressure people to plead guilty to criminal charges, have not provided appropriate information to investigators, have the ability to remotely access and alter branch accounts, and have not investigated whether Horizon could be to blame for losses in branch accounts. We are engaging vigorously with Panorama. We provided a 2-hour briefing earlier this month. It has become clear, however, that they plan to continue to make damaging allegations based on individual claims and have interviewed Second Sight in doing so. It says, we are not currently planning to appear on the Panorama programme. This is because it plans to focus on 3 individual cases, and we do not believe it's right to break the confidentiality we agreed when we set up the mediation scheme. It is also the case that those featured in the programme have asked the Criminal Cases Review Commission, an independent body, to examine their prosecution case. That is their right, and we will cooperate fully with any requests made of us. What we won't do is indulge in a public debate while that review is being conducted. Those 2 final paragraphs that I've read to you, were they an accurate reflection of the picture?
The 2, beginning with not currently planning to appear.
So were you not currently planning to appear on the Panorama programme simply because it focused on the cases and because of the Criminal Cases Review?
We'd initially considered appearing, and we'd started to make arrangements to do so, but it became, and we had a 2-hour briefing, as this note suggests, with the Panorama journalists, where we very openly answered, obviously, any question that they had. It became quite clear after that briefing that they particularly were going to focus on individual cases, and we strongly felt, I felt, and others in the organisation as well, felt that because the CCRC was involved and because of the confidentiality process that we'd agreed to through the mediation scheme, that it would be wrong to have a debate about individual cases on the TV rather than in the appropriate place.
We saw in 2013 emails from yourself saying that we don't want to appear on the Panorama programme because we don't want to give it material effectively, to assist it in taking further lines to take. Was that part of your thinking on this occasion?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
We saw earlier today an email from 2013, I think it was, that suggested that you shouldn't appear on Panorama back then because to do so would give them material.
Yeah, so I think that was a separate. So in 2013, they'd made a tentative, I think, inquiry, actually through the NFSP, as to whether they might suggesting that they might make a programme about these issues. I've never really connected the 2013 email with the actual Panorama programme that went out in 2015. The decision to not appear on the programme was taken for the reasons that I've set out there, that we didn't want to discuss individual cases, and we felt it would have been inappropriate to do so. I felt it would have been inappropriate, and I think that was a view shared across the business.
Was it not part of your media strategy, though, to not put somebody up for interview if it could help prevent the story from becoming a story?
It's certainly a consideration.
And is that reflected in this note?
It doesn't appear to be reflected in the note, but I think it would be widely understood to be a consideration, yeah.
Could we turn to poll 00174380, 5th of August 2015. This is from yourself to yourself, but it may be a group email that you've hidden the addresses from, perhaps. You will remember that I was in touch a couple of months ago about a programme being planned by the BBC's Panorama programme, not to be confused with Signed, Sealed and Delivered documentary, which I'm sure you will all be tuning in for at 9 p.m. on BBC Two this evening, on the Horizon system. I wanted to drop you a quick line to let you know that, regrettably, Panorama has returned to the subject and plans a programme on August the 17th. This will clearly contain damaging yet unsubstantiated allegations about the Post Office. The communications team continues to engage robustly with Panorama and will do everything we can to protect our business and its reputation. Could I please turn to poll 00162652? If we please turn to page 4, I believe a sub-postmaster emailed in regarding the BBC broadcast on the 19th of August 2015. We have here your response. You say, "Dear Amjad, thank you for your email about the BBC programme, which was broadcast on Monday night. I'm really sorry that it concerned you so much. I also understand that it painted a very worrying picture. I would like to reassure you on a few points. Firstly, the programme was very one-sided. Secondly, I can assure you that the allegations made are untrue. The Horizon system is efficient and effective. While the business takes its approach to prosecution seriously, we do prosecute where there is evidence of wrongdoing, but we never prosecute anyone for making innocent mistakes. There is no evidence in the cases featured on Panorama of issues in the Horizon system being to blame." Do you think it was right to send such a strongly worded response describing the allegations as untrue?
I don't think I say anything there that we didn't say in our statement to the programme.
If we scroll up, he responds on page 3. He says, "Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but if the BBC are saying that innocent people are getting prosecuted, then that scares the living daylights out of me. They must have some evidence to broadcast the programme. Also, the BBC said that the Post Office has their own laws regarding punishment." And if we scroll up, you respond, you say, "Hi Amjad, I think Angela's going to call you, but just to reassure, the BBC has not seen all the evidence in the cases it featured. We don't have our own laws. We have to meet the very high standards of the courts, and we prosecute very rarely." He follows up again on page 2, bottom of page 2. He says, "Yeah, but I don't understand why Post Office doesn't come forward and give the evidence, or are they hiding something?" I'm going to call Angela and have a talk tomorrow morning and have a talk. If we scroll up, you say, "Good idea, Amjad. I can assure you we try really hard to get our position across, but we can't talk about individual cases publicly. This is the statement we issued. I do hope you have a good conversation." Do you think that that was a fair reflection by the Post Office on the Panorama broadcast? Somebody who is clearly concerned about the implications. and you have said in strong terms, I can assure you allegations made are untrue. There's no evidence of cases featured in Panorama of issues in the Horizon system being to blame. Do you think that the Post Office looked into that sufficiently before producing rebuttals such as that one?
I do. I mean, I'm reflecting to Amjad the statement that's linked there that we gave to Panorama, our response to the Panorama programme. And I don't know if he spoke to Angela. I hope he did. I think it was a fair reflection of the position as we understood it at the time, in the context of what we understood at the time.
And one more document before we break for lunch. It's poll 001626672. 16th of September 2015. Who are the recipients here?
This would be Paul and Jonathan, who were they were responsible for the website, the internal website, and also a document called In the Loop, which was a kind of internal news document that we used to send out regularly, and we would occasionally send out one-offs. And Alana Renner was Deputy Communications Director.
You say, hi, please can we schedule the note below in for a convenient moment over the next few days for an In the Loop? So this is to communicate to everybody who works at the Post Office or?
Senior managers.
Senior management. You will recall that in August, the BBC broadcast a Panorama programme in which very serious allegations were made about the actions of the Post Office. In short, it was alleged that some postmasters were prosecuted over losses in branch when in fact there was no evidence to support such action. The suggestion was that the losses were caused by flaws in the Horizon system, despite the absence of any evidence to support this allegation in the cases referred to. We made clear at the time that these allegations were not true and that the programme was highly misleading. We also had some grave concerns about the way in which the programme was prepared and whether our position was properly reflected, given the BBC's duty to ensure coverage is fair and balanced. I wanted to let you know that this week we've submitted a formal complaint to the BBC about the Panorama programme. This followed a meeting I held with the BBC's Director of News and Current Affairs and the editor of the Panorama programme. Please let your teams know about this. It's important that colleagues across the business are aware that we are highly active in seeking to defend the business's reputation in the face of these unsubstantiated allegations. We have by that point had the Second Sight interim report and the Second Sight's second report. Do you think that you looked into and inquired about the issues with Horizon sufficiently and reflected sufficiently in order to so strongly rebut the BBC Panorama broadcast?
I do, yes.
Thank you. So that might be an appropriate moment for lunch.
All right. What time should we start up again?
Could we come back at 2:00, please?
Yeah, fine.
Thank you.